This is the Basic Biostatistics recorded lecture for 2026. If my voice sounds strange, I'm sorry. I'm just recovering from um, a viral upper respiratory tract infection. So, at the end of this lecture, you, the student, should be able to differentiate descriptive and inferential statistics and how they relate to your research design or research methodology in the future. This is important because as early as next semester, you will be tasked together with um, group mates in your block to create a research proposal and then work on that research project in your second semester of second year and then present that at the end of your first semester of your third year in medical school. Okay. And even in your specialty training, should you choose to take up a clinical specialty, you may have as many as two research papers to design and to conduct. Okay. Um, at least for pathology, there's two because pathology is actually two specialty trainings in one, your anatomic and your clinical pathology. Second, you should know and understand the concepts of population and sample. You should understand the importance of processing data into information and presenting it to fellow technical persons versus those with executive functions such as um, an institutional review board or a grant, a body that gives financial grants to research endeavors. Um, Fourth, you should be able to compute and understand common summary measures. And fifth, you should be aware of limitations and knowledge gaps. And last, you should initiate self-study to address said limitations and knowledge gaps. So before we begin, I have a huge caveat. You are going to study in one session what usually takes undergraduates one whole semester to study. Okay. And additionally, this module is the application of mathematics and statistics to the life sciences. So some concepts may already be familiar, and you may even know more than I do. Okay. So in case you would like to clarify or you'd like to um, um, show that perhaps I may have been unclear or um, wrong with regards to one aspect, you can you can suggest or raise your hand in the Q&A to show another way of understanding concepts introduced here. It is important to understand that your research undertaking will often be looked at by outsiders, so people who are not specialists in your field of study, people who may have only a passing knowledge of what you're doing, so they're not as well versed in the topic, particularly the one that you and your research team have chosen. And your job as a researcher is to help make information or evidence-based decision making for executives. So this is good for problem identification, for needs assessment, for resource allocation, and for program evaluation. Data and information, when properly processed, helps in optimizing resource allocation, will help improve health outcomes, and predict epidemiologic trends and help employ preventive measures. So let's begin with the concept of variables because variables are to central to statistics, whether descriptive or inferential statistics. So you have two main kinds of variables, your qualitative and quantitative. And variables are basically measurements or characteristics that shift between individuals, group settings, or even the same instance within the same individual group or setting. So, as in with your previous preceptorial activity, you've noticed that within the same individual, the blood pressure changes. Or for those who have taken up medical technology, hemoglobin can change in a matter of hours or even days with an individual, depending on their nutrition status or the amount of sleep that they have been getting. Okay, so qualitative variables are basically labels that we use to distinguish one group from another. An example would be your positive or negative screening test. Okay, so positive pregnancy test or negative pregnancy test. One is not more than the other, but you will label it as 0 or 1 if you are sometimes if you're using a spreadsheet, or for those who are grouping people by ethnicity, sometimes they'll use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 would be your South Asians, 2 would be your East Asians, 3 would be those of European descent, 4 would be those of African descent, and say 5 would be of Native American or descent, and maybe 6 would be Pacific Islanders. Okay, uh, that 1 to 6, there is no relationship between those numbers. 6 is not greater than 5, is not greater than 4, and vice versa. The reason they are just designations. The numbers are designations for the races. It harkens back to a time when computers could sort this out better when you put the labels in the form of numbers. But now that computers can can process strings of text much better. Computers have become more powerful. You don't need to do this already. But still, again, they're going to be converted to numbers anyway because computers only speak through machine language, assembly language. Okay. Your ordinal variables, they're either qualitative or quantitative. An example of an ordinal uh, variable that is qualitative is the birth order. If you're the firstborn, if you're a second, third, fourth, or fifth, that doesn't mean you're more or less than the person who came before or after you. Okay? Certainly, at least those in healthy families that don't have that kind of sibling rivalry. But some ordinal variables actually are quantitative in that there is a change in magnitude, okay, with regards to with regards to um, with regards to what came before or after, like with your letter grades or with your numerical grades, your cinco, your cuatro, your tres, your dos, and your uno, or for your income brackets. Yeah, okay. And variables, quantitative variables, are either discrete or continuous. Okay, so discrete variables are ones that can only be expressed as integers. So, for example, the number of people, the number of cars. There's no such thing as half of a person. There's no such thing as 1/5 of a car. Continuous variables, on the other hand, are your examples are your height or weight. These have decimal points or fractions. Okay, so there are partial quantities. Okay, not whole quantities. And aside from your discrete or continuous, you also have your interval or ratio quantitative variables. Originally, or described in older textbooks, interval variables are described as having no zero, or the zero is arbitrary. Okay. Let's say ratios with regards to interval variables do not mean anything. For example, your test scores. Okay, so when you have a ratio of like uh, 70 to somebody's 90, that doesn't mean anything because um, uh, your variables are different from each other. Okay, it's an arbitrary zero. Whereas with your ratio variables, your fixed zero, uh, ratios actually mean something. Like for example, height. Okay, so your 173 centimeters to your partner's 184 centimeters. That actually there's a meaning to it with regards to the relationship of your heights. Right. So how do you organize your variables? Well, first you have to do your measures of frequency. So you have your counts, which is the absolute numbers of a category or those with a particular characteristic. So 4 ounces of cranberry juice. You have your ratios, which is how two numbers relate to each other. For example, um, going back to our cranberry juice, um, 2 ounces of cranberry juice or 2 parts cranberry juice to 1 part whiskey. And then you have your proportion, which is a ratio where one number is compared to the sum of all counts. So for example, 2/3 cranberry juice or 66% cranberry juice in that concoction or that cocktail uh, with whiskey, okay? And then you have your rate, which is the frequency of occurrence of events in a given interval of time. So, for example, your table, which is full of medical students who are unwinding, will consume 1 pitcher of the whiskey cranberry every 30 minutes. Okay, so that's a rate. Um, while you may have learned in your high school math class not to compare apples and oranges or cranberry juice to whiskey, apples and oranges are fruits, and cranberry juice and whiskey are drinks. So they're still valid as measures of frequency. Another method for you to organize your variables is the measures of location or how one variable is in relation to other variables. Commonly, these are percentiles, deciles, or quartiles, but sometimes quintiles and tertiles exist, okay? It's usually a comparison of a value to a quote-unquote normal or quote-unquote standard value. Consider your NMAT percentile, okay, or your NMAT score. You have your total score versus your percentile ranking. So with the percentile, you are if you are 90th percentile, you are in the top 10% and better than 90% of the population. Okay? Scores mean your accuracy. Okay, so percentile, decile, quartiles indicate how you fared compared to other people. But if overall the population taking the exam did extremely terrible, you may have a low score, but you can still be in the 90th percentile because other people didn't do as well as the normally they would do with a particular test. And then finally, another way to organize your variables is to do a measure of central tendency. Okay, and these are the ones that are more familiar to us. So these include the mean, which is the sum of the observations over the total number of observations. The median, which is the middlemost observation if the number of observation is odd, or the mean of the two middlemost observations if the number of observations is even. And mode, where the most frequently occurring value in a set of observations. Consider when we look at the measures of central tendency, which of the three are particularly useful given certain measurements? For example, height, uh, height of your class, okay? The income of a particular community, or the test scores of your section. Let's do this activity during the Q&A session. Given given the variable, it is important to note your choice of summary measure. So you must know, of course, the scale of the measurement of the variable, its nature of distribution. Okay, how many are more likely to be, if it is normally distributed, okay, which means there's a symmetric distribution between the average, where the mean equals median equals the mode, okay, so that's a symmetric distribution, or if it's skewed right, where the mode is skewed to the right, where the mode is less than the median is less than the actual value of the mean, okay, or if it's skewed left, where the mean is less than the median is less than the mode. So for as a general rule, if the distribution is symmetric, the mean would be a good choice of summary measure because the median and the mode are the same. And median is used for skewed data. Okay. And I already spoiled one of the answers for the Q&A sessions. While the mode is usually for categorical or discrete variables. So categorical variables or nominal variables include your ethnic, your ethnic groups or the number of people. Another way to summarize data is your measures of dispersion, such as the range, which contain your highest and lowest observation, your variance, which is the average of the square deviations of individual observations from the mean. Uh, you have the equation here, where x is equal to each data value, and it's supposed to be showing the the bar above the x. I'm not sure why it's not showing here, but there's supposed to be a bar above the second x, which is the mean. F is the frequency by which each data value occurs. So sigma f is equal to n, basically. And then you have your standard deviation, where the square root of the variance, or delta, or the small delta, is expressed in the same units as the data. A small standard deviation means your data, okay, or the variables are close to the mean, whereas a large standard deviation means there's a wider range or more variable data. The coefficient of variation is basically your standard deviation divided by the mean. It is independent of the unit, so the coefficient of variation actually expresses it in a way that is understandable, even if the unit themselves, the units used, are unfamiliar with casual observers or readers of the technical journal. And then you have your interquartile ranges, which is the difference between your 25th and 75th percentiles, or your first and third quartile. It contains your central observations. This measures variation using percentiles, and the higher difference means data is more dispersed. So, so for our final notes with regards to organizing our variables, proportions and percentages, these are usually done to summarize nominal and ordinal data. And your percentiles, they compare individual observations to the norm. So again, think of your NMAT score. Your median is used for ordinal data, such as your income bracket or skewed quantitative data. And your range is to highlight extreme values. Standard deviation uses the same units as the mean, and when mean is presented, it will be used. Standard deviation will be used instead of the uh, instead of coefficient of variation. And then the interquartile range describes the central 50% of a distribution, regardless of how skewed it is. So your descriptive statistics is meant to summarize and present data for easier and correct comprehension and interpretation, unless you're somebody who isn't of any ethical bent and would like to use the data to manipulate people into making decisions that would be beneficial for you. Okay. But otherwise, ideally, descriptive statistics should be for summaries and data presented for easier and correct comprehension and interpretation. This is very relevant when the person who is reading usually has executive power, but not necessarily a technical person. You will find this out later in your research methods too, where you will be taught how to make executive summaries. So descriptive statistics deals in tables, graphs, charts, infographics, and PubMats or published materials, summarizing figures like the ones we've already talked about. Your qualitative measures such as your frequency, location, type, classification, category, and your quantitative measures, your central tendency and dispersion. So a lot of times you will notice in your research articles, uh, the authors would state numbers plain and simple, and yet there are other times that they would present it as figures or sometimes as tables. Okay, so when do you do these? So you use text when the data set is small and the information can be summarized in one simple sentence. In this case study, we had 5 patients, only one was female. So very easy to understand. The median net monthly income in the municipality was 20,000 pesos per household. Again, very easy to understand. Tables are a compact way of presenting large sets of detailed information. It provides counts, proportions, percentages, totals, and averages. Tables must be clean and uniform in your manuscript, providing only the necessary information with clear headings, captions, and entries that are consistent with the text. It can be used for comparisons and show interrelationships among different variables of interest, and it has to be concise. So unlike text, it has to be concise. These are the parts of your table. I'll upload the file so that you can look it up. Okay, but not going to go through them one by one. And this is a one-way table. So basically, it will just show you the time, the quarter, and the number of blood donors. So what does this table tell us? Well, there's a dramatic drop in the number of blood donors in the last quarter of the year, and not much else. Okay. And this is a two-way table because it shows us two different types of information. The number of donors that are accepted, the number deferred, versus um, the quarter of the year, and you can use it to total the number of accepted, the number of deferred, and even the total number of people willing to donate. Okay. So what does this previous table do that the previous one does not? There were higher donors deferred in the last semester of the year. Okay. and there were a higher number of donors deferred during the last quarter. Okay, so yeah. And then you have your statistical table. So this is an example from a research article that shows the results of a Mann-Whitney U-test and students t-test. Okay. And another example of a table is a dummy table, which is what you use in your research proposal. They are blank. It's meant instead to provide visualization or help define the data that is being obtained um, for the benefit of the research team, the reviewer in protocol evaluation, and it helps guide your statisticians and your computer programmers. So other than tables, you can also organize in graphs or figures. These are usually numbers, but in visual form. So it changes abstract characters into something that's readily comprehensible to the human brain. It allows for easy comparisons and the possible relationships between variables. And graphs and figures should be accurate, simple, and clear. So these are the common features and common parts of a graph. Again, I will be uploading the file, so you don't have to. I don't have to go through every single part. So what are the types of graphs or figures? Okay, you have your pie, bar, your vertical and horizontal component and histogram, your line, frequency polygon, and your scatter plot. Each type of graph or each type of figure has its purpose, which we will be discussing in the Q&A. Okay, so you have your vertical bar graph. Okay, comparisons of absolute or relative counts between categories of a quantitative discrete variable. Okay, so health workers in a major medical center with private vehicles. So in this case, the number of health workers is in your y-axis, whereas the number of vehicles um, is in your x-axis. Okay, so in a major medical center, the most number of the mode. Okay, the mode number of vehicles are those is 200 and up. Okay, two vehicles is the mode. And then you have your horizontal bar graph. This is used for relative or absolute counts between categories of a qualitative variable. Okay, so in this case, we're checking the number of donors, okay, by blood type between two mobile blood donation activities. So the one in the um, relatively pink colored or rose-colored mobile blood donation, and your green and the other blood donation is colored green. Okay, and the blood types that showed up in those two blood donation activities. And then you have your line graph. The line graph usually is used for to denote time with regards to an absolute count. Okay, so in this case, it just took data from one of our earlier tables, the one-way table, and just presented it as a line graph. And then you have your component bar graph, which is used when percentages of the same categories are being compared between two groups. Okay, so percentage of donors by quarter in this case. So quarter one, you still have expectedly more type O's, and then it's increased in quarter 3, and you'll notice that your AB shrank, okay, in quarter 3. And then you have your histogram, which shows the frequency distribution of numerical data. So we discussed about the skewness of the data. So the histogram actually does display how the data is distributed. Okay, so if it's is it a symmetrical distribution, or is it a asymmetrical distribution? So in this case, there is a skew to the right, okay, in terms of the heights of our male medical students in centimeters. Okay. And then you have your frequency polygon. So when frequencies are plotted against midpoints of specific ranges, and the endpoints are joined to the horizontal axis to form a closed figure, that is your frequency polygon. So 2 or more distributions can be depicted in one graph, such as the heights between male and female students, for example. And lastly, you have your scatter plot, which shows a relationship between two continuous quantitative variables, and a straight line that slopes upward indicates a possible direct positive correlation. If it shows a straight line that slopes downward, there is a negative correlation. Okay, yeah, so an indirect or a negative correlation. So each graph is made for the right purpose. So um, uh, your histogram and your frequency polygons use quantitative and continuous variables, and its purpose is to visualize the frequency distribution. Your bar graph is quantitative on one axis and qualitative on another axis, and compares absolute and relative counts. Okay. Your pie chart, okay, is qualitative, uses qualitative variables, and it is the composition of a group with a few number, or no, composition of a group with few, okay, so not necessarily more than 10. So because you're depicting percentages, okay, so the composition of a group into subgroups, okay. And then you have your line graph, which is your time on the x-axis, and a quantitative variable, usually on the y-axis. So it is the trend of data with time. And then your scatter plot, which is quantitative variables on both axes. A relationship of data between variables is being presented here, or a possible relationship. Of course, additional statistical tests are used to show if there is a correlation, or even if there is possible causation. So the last part for our descriptive analysis, you have your summarizing figures. You have your qualitative measures that show your frequency and your location. You have your quantitative measures, which are your central tendency and your dispersion. So aside from tables and graphs, we use the summarizing figures that were described earlier to describe or present the data. Now let's move on to our inferential statistics. So now let's go to the second part of our lecture, which is about inferential statistics. So from the word itself, infer is to conclude from evidence and reasoning. And inferential statistics is all about induction, okay? So induction versus deduction, as for those of us who have come from the social sciences, induction is general observations or tenets from specific instances. Like every single eukaryotic organism we have observed metabolizes glucose for energy. Therefore, all eukaryotes require glucose. And deduction, on the other hand, are conclusions on a specific case based on tenets or principles. So all eukaryotes require glucose as an energy source. Animals are eukaryotes, therefore animals require glucose. Um, Inferential analysis is the making of generalizations, so it's really a form of inductions about a target population based on results from a sample because no one has full access to the population. This is done by hypothesis testing or point estimation. So I mentioned two terms, sample and population. So population is basically the total number of a certain group, category, individual, people, animals, depending on what you are, the variable you're looking at, the ones that contain that variable. And yeah, entire group of individuals or items of interest in a particular study, whereas a sample is a subset of the population that was selected to be representative of the population. It is always important to remember that a sample must be large enough to represent the population, because the larger the sample, the more representative and the more reliable and accurate the results. Because, for example, if you noticed, there's a ship now. There's a darker air portion of the population. So there's a darker area, okay, and your sample barely gets this I know this area, okay. So had it would it I know would that sample have detected the phenomenon of the darkly shaded circle had it been closer to the edge of the population? So there is an importance to having diversity and randomization when it comes to sampling. Okay, uh, so there's your first sample, your second sample, your third sample, which basically just goes through the darkened portion, and your fourth sample, which doesn't you completely misses it. I was trained in anatomic and clinical pathology. In anatomic pathology, we sometimes get tumors or masses. Okay, so basically growths inside the body that have no physiologic purpose. Okay, and we are supposed to cut it up and then process it into in cassettes where they will be turned into microscope slides where we look at it under the microscope and see whether it is a benign process or if it is a malignancy, a cancer. Okay. So if I take only a small sample of a mass that is like around 10 centimeters across, okay, let's say it's almost spherical. I only take like less than a less than a 1 centimeter sample, so only one slide. I might miss important parts. So a more adept pathologist or pathology resident will know how to take different samples from different parts of the mass and then load it up into the cassette. Okay. The same can be said about our COVID-19 testing. Okay, so you have a population of people. If you keep on, if you you're only testing those who are possibly sick, and you're not testing those who have been exposed, we're not actually getting the full picture of how it's spreading through communities. Okay. Let's talk about the concept of estimation from inferential statistics. So estimation in statistics is the usage of various mathematical tools to determine the measurement of some characteristic of a population, which is based on a sample.
So an estimation is usually a parameter, which is a numerical constant based on observing the whole population, or a numerical constant, so sorry, a statistic on the other hand is a statistic estimation is a numerical constant gained from observing a random, ideally a random sample. Okay, so parameter, whole population, and and a statistic is a random sample. Okay, a constant from a random sample. And estimates can be point estimates. So an example would be a single number resulting in the average height of people ages 20 to 24 based on the heights of average height of people age 20 to 24 based on the heights of young college graduates. Okay. And an interval estimate, on the other hand, is a range, your lowest and highest result, or lower and higher limit. So these are bounding values where the parameter might exist with a degree of confidence. Okay, so your parameter is there. So we estimate that the parameter, okay, is within these two figures. Okay. So an example of these, an example of these are from hypothetical research studies. So research objective to determine the average height of the male students of UERM class 2029. The results are 1.87 meters, a point estimate, with a 95% confidence interval. And the interval estimate is 1.54 and 1.94 meters. Okay, and the estimation, you got it using a mean. Okay, so in this case, the parameter may have been could have been derived not just from sampling, but the whole of the population of UERM, male population of UERM class 2029. Now, another research objective to determine the proportion of male clinical clerks with decreased hemoglobin levels, that usually this is less than 14 grams per deciliter. And there is a 23% point estimate with a 99% confidence interval. So the interval estimate is 22.8% and 23.2%. Okay, and this one it was derived from proportion. Okay. So what is hypothesis testing? So hypothesis testing is basically how you are able to infer again, um, a generalization based on a sample. Okay, so hypothesis testing starts by writing down your null hypothesis and your alternative hypothesis. And your null hypothesis is always the one that we either accept or reject. Your alternative hypothesis automatically is tawag ito, it exists only because of the null hypothesis. Okay? You do not accept or reject the alternative hypothesis. Okay? You only accept or reject your null hypothesis. So your null hypothesis is usually there is no difference, or there is no marked difference between two values, or basically the opposite statement of what the general objective of a research paper is uh, trying to have evidence or gather evidence for, or for their hypothesis. Okay, so number two, you have to decide on the appropriate test statistic, which either is Z or T, depending on the distribution or depending on the size of the sample, also known as the critical ratio and the sampling distribution. Okay. And there are three types of sampling distribution. You have the sampling distribution of the mean, which is the mean of every sample group from the population and then plotting data points from it. For example, if you have the population of every newborn infant during in the Philippines in the year 1984. So that sampling distribution of the mean means you have to take samples from various provinces, okay, and then plot it as data points. And then you have your sampling distribution of proportion, and then you have your t distribution, which is based on which is based on small samples, okay, when you don't know the whole of the population. And then for number 3, you state the level of significance, which is alpha. And then determine your values test statistic that must be attained to be declared significant, also known as the critical value, or the critical region, which is the region of values that correspond to rejection of the null hypothesis. Then you compute the test statistic, then draw and state your conclusion. Okay, so we will go into detail further in the following slides. So when you write your null and alternative hypothesis, the null hypothesis, or H sub 0, is that there is no significant difference between treatment or control groups, or there is no disease in the patient, even if the test is positive. Okay. So in this case, if you're using a diagnostic test, the null hypothesis is basically saying there is no relationship between your diagnostic test and the evidence of or there is no relationship between the results of a positive test and the existence of the disease. Okay. And then you can have your two-tailed alternate hypothesis, like there is a significant difference between treatment and control groups, or for diagnostic tests, you can have it like a two-tailed alternative hypothesis sometimes, okay, that a positive test may actually, there's a relationship, doesn't matter which, it's either higher or significantly higher or significantly lower between those who do have the disease and those who do not have the disease, okay? Or your one-tailed alternative hypothesis, which is the variable for the treatment group will be lower than the variable for the control group, or the variable for the treatment group will be higher than the variable for the control group. Or in this case, if the test is positive, that means there exists a disease compared to or if the test is negative, it is possible that the disease exists. Okay, so it's either one of those two things. Okay, not just an open-ended there is a significant difference. It's either higher or it's either lower. Okay, so if it's positive, it's possible that there's a disease, or another one-tailed alternative hypothesis, if it's negative for in this test, that means there is a disease exists. Okay. For step number 2, you decide on the appropriate test statistic or critical ratio. Choosing the right test statistic is a major topic itself in statistics. Sometimes you use the wrong test statistic, and it's often based on the probability distribution of the variable in question. Okay, so if you know that the probability distribution of a certain variable is a normal distribution, i.e. it's not skewed or it's symmetric in distribution, you use a z statistic. If the sample size is small or the distribution and standard deviation is unknown, you use a t statistic. Then for step 3, you decide or select the level of significance for the statistical test, which is alpha. So alpha gives the probability of incorrectly rejecting your null hypothesis when it is actually true. So the smaller the alpha, the less likely one rejects the null hypothesis. And therefore, the more likely that there is in fact a significant difference, or therefore, the test, okay, the level of significance is more stringent. So traditionally, alpha values are 0.05, 0.01, and 0.0001, which has the corresponding 5%, 1%, and 0.1% likelihood that the null hypothesis has been incorrectly rejected. Okay, so that is your, which is a type 1 error, or what we call a false positive. Okay. Um, and your confidence interval is equal to 1 minus alpha. So the confidence interval, if you have a 5% alpha value, is a 95% confidence interval, or 0.95. Okay. Which brings us to our types of errors. You have your type 1 error, also known as your alpha error, which is the rejecting a true null hypothesis, and concluding there is, which is basically concluding there is a statistically significant difference when there is none. Okay, so your null hypothesis is still true. Okay, and your type 2 error, or your beta error, is rejecting a false null hypothesis. Okay, so you rejected a, yeah, which is concluding that no statistically significant difference is there, when in fact there is one. Then for your step number 4, you must determine the value of the test statistic that has to be attained to be declared significant. So the significant value equals the critical value. And this is the dividing line between the area of null hypothesis acceptance and the area of null hypothesis rejection. Almost everyone uses computers or calculators to do statistical analysis for this nowadays, but back in the day, you would actually manually compute this, and it was considered a point of skill, especially for undergraduates, to be able to know the appropriate test statistic and to do the actual calculations by hand. So for your two-tailed tests, okay, the critical region is where we, so I'm going to turn on my laser pointer. Anything that falls outside of the critical region is basically where we reject the null hypothesis. But in a one-tailed test where there's you notice that the area here of the critical, outside of the critical region, is equal. So these two is equal to the area here, okay? Because in the one-tailed, if you make it a two-tailed, two-tailed alternate hypothesis, you divide the area in a one-tailed alternate hypothesis by 2, so that you get these areas in a two-tailed hypothesis. Okay, so in this case, if it falls here, that means that there is a significant difference, so you reject your null hypothesis. Okay. And then again, you perform the calculation. So the formula varies depending on the chosen statistic, but simplified, it is t equals to the observed statistic minus the expected parameter under the null hypothesis divided by the standard error. Again, this has been simplified by statistical software. And then after you do that, you draw and state the conclusion. Okay? Do you accept or reject the null hypothesis? So if the computed value of the test statistic falls in the critical region, you reject the null hypothesis. If p-value, let us discuss the p-value in the next slide, is less than alpha, you reject the null hypothesis. If the confidence interval does not include the null value, you reject the null hypothesis. Okay? But if the null hypothesis is accepted, the results are not statistically significant. But if the null hypothesis is rejected, results are statistically significant, and then you state your alternative hypothesis. So there is a significant difference between control and test groups, or there is the presence of disease when the test is either positive or when the test is negative based on when the test is positive or when the test is negative, depending on what your one-tailed alternative hypothesis is. And the p-value is, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the p-value is the probability of obtaining a result as extreme as or more extreme than the one observed if the null hypothesis is true. Or it is reframed as the probability that an observed result is due to chance alone. And the p-value is usually calculated after the statistical test has been performed. Okay? So our source is White SE, the editor of Basic and Clinical Biostatistics, 5th edition. And I will see you in the online sessions. Thank you.